Hello, welcome to All These Repairs. Today I'll be rebuilding the AC system in my 1984 VW Rabbit convertible. A lot of people will say it's a convertible, why do you need AC? Just put down the top, and they're absolutely correct. 95% of the time in the summer it's nice to drive around with the top down. Until one of those pesky summer thunderstorms rolls in, or it's just a ridiculously hot day at 2 in the afternoon, and you just want to close the top, and then you don't want to die inside of your vehicle from heat exhaustion. So we're going to have a working AC system today. AC systems on vehicles is one of those things where if you just buy those quick recharge and seal cans from your local auto parts store, you're probably going to result in an AC system that works very shortly and then fails miserably and dramatically. In the form of a compressor that failed, that sends metal throughout the whole system, and then you have to replace absolutely everything, and then it gets really expensive really quickly.
We have a pretty extensive list of tools and parts required for today's repair. If we're going to go through the effort to repair the system, make sure to do it right. We don't know how it was serviced in the past. This is going to take some time, but it will also save you some money in the long run. It's a long video and it's very detailed, and that's because I wanted to show how to properly clean and service all of these components.
Real quick overview of your AC system. You're going to have your compressor, which is right here. You have your high side hose, your condenser underneath here. Then you have your low side hose, and then finally you have your receiver dryer, which is tucked right underneath this washer reservoir. With our AC system properly evacuated, no refrigerant present, I'm going to remove the negative side terminal of the battery, and I'm going to start removing all of these components to properly clean them.
To remove and replace the AC compressor, you will first have to remove the alternator. It's a fairly straightforward process, and I've got a video linked below on how I did it.
We are going to loosen these two bolts right here that hold the AC compressor in. We're going to remove the AC compressor adjustment bolts here. You want to be careful not to damage your condenser if you're not planning on replacing it. The newer style adjustment bolts is kind of this little star bit here. Same thing, you just remove it and then remove this one over here the same way. I'm going to remove this support arm for the hoses. Remove the connector from the AC compressor. Carefully slide it down, and then you can remove the belt. Move some of these wires out of the way, and now we are going to crack these fittings on the compressor loose. Ooh, this one was pretty loose. And remove the second hose. You can finish removing these screws holding the compressor in. And now you can wiggle out the AC compressor. The washer bottle just slides out. Slide this little connector off. And then you can just kind of set it aside here. We're going to remove the condenser by removing these two screws and leaning the radiator back. Carefully lift up on this radiator, remove it out of its little mounts in here. And then you can kind of slide it back a little bit, gives us some room to get the condenser out. Probably the most difficult and critical part about this repair is going to be cracking this junction loose right here on the condenser. It's hard to find condensers for these vehicles, and if you do find one, they're rather pricey. Mine's still in perfect condition, so I'm not going to be replacing it today. And you have to make sure you need to use 2 wrenches, because otherwise if you just turn on this one, you will definitely crack the condenser somewhere in this area. So use a 22 and a 19, and then carefully crack it loose. As you can see, my hose is rusted to this fitting, so we'll just take it off when it's removed. Use a 17 and a 19 to crack this lower junction loose. Remove these condenser mounts. A little tip that I always like to give, as you're removing screws, screw them back into where you pulled them out from. Then it makes it a lot easier when you're not trying to have to figure out where every screw went. We're going to remove these lines from this receiver dryer. Remove these 2 bolts that hold the bracket in. And we're going to carefully crack these lines all loose. Carefully remove this from the condenser. Very carefully, we will remove the condenser. Yeah. Inside the vehicle, you can see that I've already removed my dash. I've got a video on that you can watch. We need to crack here and here loose to remove the lines. Similar to the condenser on this evaporator, you want to make sure that you're not bending this at all, so work very carefully with 2 wrenches. Cut the zip tie. Same thing right here on the expansion valve. Use 2 wrenches.
In order to remove the low pressure line, you will first have to remove this nut which mounts it to the strut tower. And if you have a vehicle with the CIS injection system like I do here, it also holds these idle air control valves, which you can just place aside.
Similar to the other one, wiggle on the outside and kind of bend it. I will be reusing these little rubber pieces, so we need to carefully remove them from the firewall. The easiest is if you push this down, you have a helper from the inside kind of push them out. A screwdriver helps as well. With the rubber grommets removed, carefully remove your lines.
These lines curve inside, so it makes it a bit of a puzzle.
Put my nut back here so I don't forget where it went.
In order to disassemble the heater box, you obviously have to remove it first. I have a video linked below on how to remove it.
Heater box disassembly can be accomplished with more or less 2 screwdrivers. First, I'm going to remove this little side cover here. There's one of these on both sides. The other side I had already removed it in the vehicle. Carefully slide this off and slide the cooling hoses through it for the heater core. Grab yourself a flathead, and we are carefully going to remove this blower cover just by prying there. Pry similarly on the back side. Careful, it's all brittle plastic, so be super smooth with it. You can place it aside. It can be a little holder for all of our screws. Use that same flathead and continue prying off these little plastic clips here. Couple on the bottom here as well. And now you can carefully pull apart these two heater halves, these two heater box halves. I forgot one here. These little ones are always sneaky. There's two of them, one here and one on the back here. There is some sort of a rubber gasket that runs between these. I actually think it's just RTV. I'm going to continue taking this apart so that I can slide the evaporator out. Carefully pry off this putty. All right, here we have the expansion valve off. I'm not going to be removing this little thermometer probe here, so I'm just going to leave it in there. And then very carefully, you can slide out the condenser. All this junk settled in here. All this mysterious foam here that when you touch it disintegrates, kind of like it's from outer space. And then if you look and you see all of this junk in here, so this is all stuff from the outside that fell in from the vent and from the blower because there's only a very rough filter on that. So we'll be installing a little mini filter upgrade for our fresh air in the vehicle as well to prevent all of these various tree parts from somehow getting inside of our system.
For today's project, I decided to reuse the evaporator, and because of that, I had to clean it. So I just used some water and a brush to carefully brush all the debris out. As you can see in this clip, that's why there's still water on the concrete, because that's just still dripping out from between the fins.
We're going to flush this AC system out. I have some sort of a AC flush solution here that I picked up. To do this, you can just dump a little bit carefully into the component you would like to flush. I'm going to cap everything off, tilt it around to make sure that it really runs through everything. And then we use some compressed air here. I'm going to blow it all out. Here I've got the condenser. I took it inside, I washed it all off, I peeled a bunch of the rocks out very carefully. So we're going to do the same thing and flush the inside out. Healthy dose of flush solvent. Plug the end, rock it, then carefully we'll blow it out.
Now that you have flushed both the evaporator and the condenser, set them out in the sun so that they can dry. This allows any of the remaining flush solvent to evaporate off so that it's not in our AC system when we fill it up with oil and refrigerant.
I slid my heater core in. I'm taking this little piece, just slide it around back, and it clips in, just like we removed it. Got these kind of louver type of things here. They go right here. There's a bunch of old original foam down here, so I'm going to be replacing that. Some replacement from the home improvement store. Nothing fancy. Right there in the original spot, put one on the other side. Kind of mimicking the factory here, I put some sticky foam on these edges right here just to seal in the evaporator very well. Slide it in carefully. Kind Kind of hard angle to see here, but we have all our components in place. We have the louvers, we have the evaporator, and we have our heater core. Now we are just going to slowly slide this second piece on. So where you need to play alignment, make sure everything's aligned properly so you're not damaging any components. Just be patient. With the heater box almost completely assembled, don't forget we need to put some silicone in here because that forms our watertight seal, so when our AC is running, all the water doesn't just drip into our carpet, but actually gets collected and then runs out our little drip tube, which I'll show you guys later. So grab yourself some silicone.
Make sure to finish applying silicone to the rest of this connection. Slide the two heater box halves together and then apply the clips. You can see my finished product here. It's not the prettiest, but it will be watertight.
I'm gonna take some more of this sealant stuff here. I'm going around a second time here because one layer is not quite thick enough. We wanted to make a nice good seal. Okay, here we have our new AC compressor right here. It comes with some oil in here, but I'm going to be replacing it all with this oil right here, made by the same manufacturer as the compressor. So we are going to dump the old oil out. You can see some running out. You can just give it a spin. You'll get about 80 milliliters or so coming out of here. And then once that's done, we can move on to the next. Filling up the AC compressor with oil now. Simple, I have a graduated cylinder. The manual states that it needs to be 75 milliliters of oil in the AC compressor. Well, that's about 52. Then we'll do 23 for the next. In the manual, it lists that there is 15 milliliters of oil that need to go into the suction hose and into the discharge hose. But I don't like putting in the hose because then you're kind of moving this hose around that has extra oil in it. So I'm just going to be adding 15 additional milliliters into our evaporator and into our condenser to take care of that. Reassembly is fairly straightforward. I have this, it's called Nylog. A lot of people like to use it on their AC components, so I'm just going to apply a small amount to the sealing surface. Place the O-ring on top. Wipe it around that a little bit. I'm grabbing my little clip for the thermal bulb here, snapping it back into place.
Heater box installation time, I've got the video that's linked below. After the heater box is installed and the low side hose is tightened, apply plumber's putty just like how it was originally. This area gets very cold when the AC system runs, and this prevents condensation from forming and oxidizing these areas.
Next, I'm going to continue installing all these hoses that run into the cabin. Make sure that right here all of these connections are clean. Use new gaskets, and like I did on the evaporator, is I used a little bit of Nylog on them.
Here I've got the new AC compressor. It takes a little bit of wiggling to get in place. Take those mounting bolts, start screwing them in by hand. Then just loosely tighten them with a ratchet because we will be moving the compressor around to install the belts.
With the new compressor installed, don't forget to install your alternator belt first, followed then by your AC compressor belt. Next, we want to adjust the tension on this AC belt right here. In the manual, it states 5 to 10 millimeters of deflection. So if you have this older adjustment system right here with the vertical screw, it's actually really easy to do it. But for those of you with the newer one on the side, what you can do is you can take a little pry bar, kind of push it against the AC compressor. I have a towel here so I don't scratch up this brand new component. We kind of press it back. See when it gives you about 5 to 10 millimeters of deflection. So you don't want it ridiculously tight, but you also don't want it ridiculously loose. So I just measure right between here. It's a little hard to see, but right about there. That'll be good. And then just tighten these screws down. Tighten these clamp bolts to 25 Newton meters or 18 foot-pounds, or just make them nice and snug is what I'm doing. I couldn't find a torque spec for these bolts on the AC compressor, so make them nice and snug. We're going to add 35 milliliters of oil to our condenser. All right, it slid in. One thing I forgot to mention, there are little rubber feet on the bottom of the condenser as well as on the radiator, so you want to make sure that you have those installed. It keeps some of the vibrations out of the system a little bit, which is good because this is a delicate part. Install these screws that hold the condenser in. For now, I'm just going to make them hand tight. With some of these hoses now loosely in place, I'm going to remount this hook again. Tighten down the support bracket bolt. I couldn't find a torque spec, so just make it snug. And now we can start tightening down these AC lines here. I couldn't find any torque specs for these either, so if anyone finds them, please leave a comment below, then I'll update the video. But they weren't extremely snug when we pulled them off, and really we're only crushing a little rubber O-ring in there. So they don't have to be ridiculously tight. With this wrench I have tons of leverage, so by the time it gets snug with the wrench, that ought to be good enough. And that's kind of how I'm going to take the approach to tightening all of these AC line fittings. This is an aluminum compressor, so you don't want to make it too ridiculously tight, otherwise you'll strip the threads on that, and I just paid a lot of money for it, so not trying to do that. We're going to be replacing the Schrader valves as well. There's one located here on the low pressure side, and then there's one located over here on the high pressure hose. Grab a little bit of the nylon. Insert the Schrader valve, and then use the little tool that comes in the kit. Just kind of snug it down by hand right there. And repeat the process on the high side end. Install this little line, and for most of you, it probably has a sensor or two on it. Make sure to reconnect those. Again, only hand tight for now until we install the receiver dryer. I bought a conversion kit for the fittings. I like to install just a little bit of Teflon tape. It's really not necessary. There's a gasket in here, but it just makes me sleep better at night, so I do it. Snug it up. For this front one, this long piece here won't fit, so I had to trim it off like I did here. And then I'm going to install this, and I'll just use a pair of pliers to tighten it down. After we've tightened everything on the AC system, we've installed new Schrader valves, everything like that. The only things we haven't tightened yet is this little line and this line on the inside, because we need a little bit of wiggle room. We're going to install a new receiver dryer. This thing is under pressure, and it's made sure that it's in a very dry inside because this contains a desiccant that will dry out any moisture that's potentially left in our AC system. So we really don't want to leave this exposed to the moist ambient air here any longer than we have to. We have new O-rings installed, and this we will now screw off these caps. You heard that hissing right there? That is the pressure from inside of our receiver dryer running out. So it is now slowly starting to dry the air around us, which is an impossible task in the summer. So we need to get this installed quickly. Don't forget to add some oil to your receiver dryer. I have the receiver dryer and the bracket just loosely around it right now. Move the lines out of the way so that you don't get any dirt on them or in them. This part is pretty tedious, not gonna lie. Attach your lines. Attach your bracket. Tighten these down. To tighten the hose clamp that holds the dryer to the bracket, I'm now just using a little wrench. It goes easier this way because then you can adjust it to the place of least stress, and then you just tighten it, as opposed to doing it all beforehand and having to guess where that would be. Once you tighten up any last fittings that you hadn't tightened yet, grab your manifold gauge set and hook it up. Find yourself a vacuum pump, fire it up, and we're going to vacuum out the system. All the kind of smoke that was coming out of here, that's all moisture from the system that we're pulling out right now. So when we pull a vacuum, you actually reduce the boiling point of water significantly, so then it boils at room temperature, and this is how we're drying out the system effectively.
And don't forget to install your alternator.
Congratulations on making it this far in the video. So now I've pulled a vacuum, I've waited a couple hours at this point, and it's still holding, and now I'm going to charge it up with a refrigerant. This process is very similar for all vehicles. I'm not going to be going in detail on how to charge a vehicle with refrigerant. This car, once you've done all the repairs, replaced whatever you need to replace, you can just follow anyone else's instructions on how to do that. Thanks for watching another episode of Ollie's Repairs. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, subscribe, and comment for more.